good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the online launch of the Global Circularity Gap Report 2026. My name is Hilde van Duin, and I'm the CEO here at Circle Economy.
And I'm Álvaro Conde, lead of the Circularity Gap Report at Circle Economy. It's great to have all of you with us today. Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us, and we have a really exciting session lined up for you. To start, Alvaro will walk you through the key insights from this year's report. This will take around 15 minutes. After that, we'll move into a 30-minute panel discussion with a fantastic group of experts, where we'll explore different perspectives on the findings and what they mean in practice. We thank the panelists for joining us today, and we very much look forward to hearing from them later in the session. And last but definitely not least, we'll close with a 10-minute Q&A session, where we'll address some of your questions, so from the audience, your questions and reflections. But before we begin, just a few quick practical notes. The chat is currently open. Feel free to introduce yourself and let us know where you're joining us from. We've seen in the registrations that we have people joining us from across the globe, and it would be really nice to see, for everyone to see who's there in the chat. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat function. After the presentation, we'll close the chat and we'll switch to the Q&A function. That's where you will be able to submit your questions. We'll be monitoring those and we'll select a number of questions to address during the final part of the session. And just to note, only questions submitted through the Q&A function will be considered, not the questions in the chat, only the questions in the Q&A function. So if you have any questions on the report to Alvaro or to the panelists, make sure to put them in the Q&A. So with that, let's get started. But before we dive into this year's findings, let me take a moment to introduce to you who we are and how we got here. Because you might all know the Circularity Gap Report, or the CGR, but not all of you might know the organization behind it, Circle Economy. We are a non-profit organization that was founded in 2011, and we're based here in Amsterdam. We work with partners around the world to help accelerate the transition to a circular economy by providing the knowledge, the strategies, and tools needed to turn ambition into action. Our work brings together research, data analysis, advisory services, and capacity building programs. And we focus on 4 key areas: finance, cities, employment, and value chains. You may know us from the Circularity Gap Report, but it's important to say that we see this type of analysis and work not as an endpoint, but as an important part of a much broader effort to support change at the system level. And now let's go to today, because today we're launching the 9th edition of the Global Circularity Gap Report. The journey with the Global Circularity Gap Report started back in 2018 with a simple but ambitious question. How do we measure the state of circularity at the global level? At the time, in 2018, the circular economy was gaining momentum, but there was no clear way to track progress, no shared benchmark. So we set out to change that. Guided by a single principle: what we don't measure, we don't manage. We introduced the first global circularity metric in 2018. And since then, each edition of the report has built on that foundation, tracking how materials flow through the global economy and how effectively they are turned into societal value. And over the past editions, one message has become increasingly clear. The circularity gap is growing. It is not shrinking. And this brings us to this year, because while measuring material flows remains essential, it doesn't tell the full story. It tells us what is happening, but not always what it means economically. And that's exactly where this year's report takes a next step. And before I hand over to Alvaro to reveal the value gap, I would like to take a moment to thank Deloitte for supporting this edition of the report for the 4th consecutive year. It's this kind of generous, continued support and partnership that makes this work possible. And with that, Alvaro, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hilde. As Hilde just mentioned, over the past 8 editions of the Circularity Gap Report, we focused on measuring circularity through material flows. So we look at how resources move through the global economy, what are the set of processes that drive this, and what kind of impacts they create. That remains is essential. It is a core part of our work. But this year we take a different step. We shift the lens. This year we introduce a new economic perspective to the report, and with it also a new concept, the value gap. This is also the first year of a new methodology, one that complements our existing work rather than replacing it. But why focus on value? You might be asking yourselves. Well, in short, because value is what ultimately drives decisions. Value signals different things. It signals function, it signals scarcity, it signals complexity, and also purpose. And in that sense, value can also be understood as the thread that connects resources, economies, and societies. And if we want to understand how the current economy operates the way it does, we need to look at how value is being created and how it is being lost. So with that in mind, let's now take a closer look at the scale of value loss in the global economy. So what did we find? The scale of value loss in the global economy is very significant. Using data from 2021, we estimate the value gap at 25.4 trillion euros. To put that humongous figure into perspective, that's larger than the entire US economy, the largest economy in the world measured by GDP. Another way to look at it is that the value gap represents nearly 1/3 of global GDP. This is the scale of the figure. Or if we put it even more simply, another way to look at the value gap is that for every 3 euros of value that we create, we are losing 1 euro. Let that sink in. Because what this really tells us is that the linear economy is not just environmentally unsustainable, it's also deeply inefficient in economic terms. We are systematically losing value at scale. But if we now take a step back to really understand what the value gap is, we also first need to look at how we currently measure value and how this links to measuring economic success. Today, economic performance is largely assessed through GDP growth. It is the world's main benchmark, widely used as a proxy for measuring prosperity and progress. But GDP only tells a part of the story. It measures economic activity, so what is produced and exchanged in the market, but it does not capture what happens behind the scenes, so to speak. It is a flow metric that overlooks key things like resource depletion and environmental damage. It doesn't account for waste generation or asset underutilization and deterioration. And it doesn't really tell us whether value is being retained or lost. So what we see today is a system where GDP can grow, while at the same time value is actually being eroded. In other words, we are growing the economy, but not necessarily creating more value. Why is this? It is mainly because GDP tends to favor financial value creation, often at the expense of other forms of value, such as natural and social value. If we want a more complete picture of economic performance, we need to look at both sides, value creation and value loss. And that's exactly what the value gap aims to do. It complements GDP by putting value creation into perspective, by capturing and monetizing the avoidable hidden costs linked to the linear economy, which today largely remain unaccounted for. So what does that include exactly? What's inside this 25.4 trillion figure? Let's take a closer look now at what sits behind the value gap. So to answer this question, how is value being lost? We broke down the value gap into 5 key pathways that you can see on screen now. So each of these pathways represents a different way in which value erodes across the economy, from early stage production losses to inefficiencies in how we use and manage long-lived assets. Together, the value loss pathways give us a more complete picture of how value is lost, and importantly, how it can also be retained. Let me briefly walk you through each one of them. First, processing losses. These occur during production stages when raw materials are wasted due to inefficiencies, defects, or low yields during their transformation into finished or semi-finished products. So what this tells us is that really value is lost in many cases even before products reach the market. And this is despite the fact that these materials already embody large amounts of energy, labor, and capital. Second, energy losses. So across the energy system, over half of primary energy is lost before it delivers any useful service, whether through heat dissipation or conversion inefficiencies, mostly by inefficient fossil fuels. In other words, half of all energy consumed is wasted. Third, food losses and waste. This refers to food that is produced, grown for human consumption, but never actually eaten. Globally, around 1/3 of all food produced is lost or wasted. That's not just a tremendous amount of loss of food, it's also a loss of all the resources that went into producing it. The fourth pathway is end-of-life losses. So when products and assets reach their end of life, much of their value isn't actually fully exploited yet. This is often because we default to turning them into waste or to low-value recovery options. But in many cases, they still have significant value that could be preserved through lifetime extension strategies such as reuse, repair, or remanufacturing. And finally, consumption of fixed capital, or depreciation, as it's known in economic terms. This refers to the gradual loss of value in long-lived assets. Think of things like buildings, infrastructure, machinery, vehicles, the stock side of things. Over time, these assets deteriorate, become obsolete, or are damaged, leading to a steady erosion of the value they embody. And this is important because they don't only have value, they also enable value creation throughout the economy. So across these 5 pathways, we see a consistent pattern. Value is being lost in different ways across the entire economy, often in ways that are avoidable. And this is a key important point that I would like to stress. The figures that we are presenting, that we are sharing with you today, focus on avoidable losses. So those that circularity can help reduce or prevent. Which brings us to the next step. If we understand now, or we got an overview of how value is lost, we also need to understand why it is lost and where it happens. To do that, we look at the value gap through 3 complementary lenses. The first is the pathways, which we just covered. Second, the mechanisms, the underlying reasons why these losses occur. And third, the value chain stages, so where along the life cycle these losses are concentrated. Let's begin with the why. So, like I've said, while pathways describe how value is lost, mechanisms explain what's driving those losses. And we have structured the why across the analysis in 4 key mechanisms. The first one is the mismanagement of products and materials. This is about inefficiencies in how we handle and process materials and design products, leading to unnecessary waste across supply chains. This alone accounts for roughly a quarter of total value loss. The second mechanism is premature obsolescence. So here, products and assets are discarded earlier than technically necessary, not because they no longer work or are unable to provide function, but because of things like market dynamics, regulations, or user behavior. Third, the physical deterioration of long-lived assets. So over time, assets such as buildings, infrastructure, and machinery lose value through wear and tear, but also through suboptimal use and maintenance. In many cases, it is important to highlight this, the premature replacements of these assets is incentivized. And fourth, unpriced environmental and social cost. This is a bit of the elephant in the room. It's also known as negative externalities in economics. Most of you will probably have heard about this term. So these are the impacts that don't show up in market prices. So you can think of things like pollution, resource depletion, and health impacts. When we account for them, they represent the single largest share of value loss, around 30%. And this is despite our internalization of externalities being relatively partial, and you can find all of the details about that in the report. But despite that, they still account for the single largest share of value loss at around 30%. So if we take together, these mechanisms show that value loss is not random. It is driven by how our systems are designed, how incentives are structured, and how decisions are made. If we now shift the focus and look at the where these losses are occurring along the value chain, what we see is that they are spread across the entire system. Upstream losses are driven largely by energy inefficiencies and processing losses. Midstream, or in the use phase, value is lost through energy inefficiency and the gradual and premature deterioration of assets. And downstream, the biggest losses come from premature disposal. So when products and materials, as I've been saying, are not used to their full functional potential, but turn into waste in a premature way. So the key takeaway is this: value loss is not concentrated in one place, it is systemic. It happens across the entire life cycle, driven by a combination of technical inefficiencies, behavioral patterns, and economic signals that don't reflect true costs. And that also hints and tells us something important. Closing the value gap will require action at multiple levels, not just better technologies, but also better incentives, better design, and better decision making. So what does this mean in practice? What can be done to close the value gap? In the report, we outline a set of priority actions for different stakeholders to help close the value gap. These are businesses, financial actors, and policymakers. And you can see this overview right now on the screen. But let me briefly leave you with a few key messages. The first one is that we need to measure value loss alongside value creation. Why? Because what we measure shapes what we prioritize. And currently, we are overlooking value loss. Second, this circular economy is not just an environmental agenda. It is a system-level economic opportunity to retain and recover value through smarter resource management. And if designed well, it can also lead to better social outcomes. And third, this transition cannot happen in isolation. It requires coordination. Coordination across value chains, across actors, and across geographies. At its core, the value gap shows us something quite fundamental. This is not a story of marginal inefficiencies, it is a story of system design. Value loss is not accidental, just like linearity is not accidental. It is built into how the economy operates through waste overgeneration, resource depletion, and the underuse of assets. Which also means that incremental improvements won't be enough. Closing the value gap requires system-level change, and design is the key here. The good news is that much of this value loss is technically avoidable, as I've been saying, and as the figures show. And with the right incentives and approaches, circularity can retain and recover a significant share of it. But this also requires a broader shift in how we think about value and how we understand value. And not just as efficiency or output, but also in terms of outcomes like well-being and long-term prosperity. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to you, Hilde, to take us into the panel discussion.
Thank you, Alvaro. I think that was a very powerful overview, and it really challenges how we look at economic performance today. Because what this shows is that the circular economy is not just about doing less harm, it is about addressing a fundamental inefficiency in how our economy works. And that brings us exactly to the purpose of the next part of this session, because if the value gap, as you said, is systemic, then closing it requires action from across the system, from policy, from businesses, from finance, and from research. So I'm very pleased to be joined today by a fantastic panel of experts who will help us unpack what these findings mean in practice, where the biggest opportunities lie, what barriers still exist, and what it will take to move from insight into action. Let me briefly take a moment to introduce each of our three panelists to you. So joining us today is Arnold Tucker. He is a professor of industrial ecology at the Institute of Environmental Sciences at Leiden University. He also works for TNO, the Netherlands Organization for Applied Scientific Research. And Arnold currently coordinates a string of major research programs across Europe in the fields of circular economy and resource efficiency. Welcome, Arnold. I think we will see you appear on the screen soon. Then our second panelist joining us today is Diewertje Ebbels. She leads the circularity practice at Deloitte Netherlands. She is part of the strategy and business design service line at Deloitte Netherlands. Diewertje has over 15 years of experience in strategy consulting. She has been supporting clients in the energy and resources industry through the material and energy transition, with the focus on helping their clients move towards a circular economy. So welcome on the panel today, Diewertje. And then our third panelist is Arno Berends. He's a senior environmental economist in the Environment, Natural Resources and Blue Economy Global Practice of the World Bank Europe and Central Asia region. Arno brings over 20 years of experience working primarily on the circular economy, climate finance, and the energy transition. We're happy to have you on the panel today, Arno Berends. So let me start with just an invitation to all three panelists to share one sentence, and I will be strict on this. Try to summarize a one sentence main takeaway from this year's report. And I would like to start with you, Diewertje. What's your one sentence takeaway from the report?
Me, it was that actually the value loss of linear practices is even bigger than I anticipated up front.
Even bigger. Yeah. Thank you, Diewertje. Arno, what was your main takeaway from the report?
Yeah,
yes,
more
thank you.
sorry.
Arno, yeah, this is
Oh, sorry. We have to be very careful. Arno, yeah, sorry.
This is what's going to happen.
This is going to happen. And then Arnold.
Okay, great. Thank you and good afternoon to everybody, and congratulations to Circular Economy to the 9th Circular Gap Report. Really good work. I guess you want some kind of non-academic answer to this question. And of course, when I read the report, it's obviously stunned by the large number, 20 to 30 trillion. So my one sentence would be, think of the Circularity Gap Report as a global budget review that reveals that we're throwing away 1/3 of the world's economic value every year. And at the same time, we wonder why we're broke.
Yes. That's a good observation. Thank you so much, Arno. Now over to you, Arnold.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, also congratulations for doing this. I think, of course, I was stunned by the number as well, but in one sentence, it is good that you try to put an economic value on this. I mean, that is the language that business and policymakers understand, and how crude it is. I mean, I don't care, as long as we put values on these kind of things. And that is a really great achievement.
Thank you so much. Before we dive into the next questions to the panel, I just want to remind the audience of the fact that they are welcome to leave any questions that they want to ask to Alvaro or to the panelists, to leave the questions in the Q&A. So that's just a reminder for the audience that any questions or reflections that you might have, you're welcome to share them with us. Then Arnold, I would like to stay with you if that's okay. I have the first question for you. Traditional indicators like GDP capture overall economic output, but often miss losses and inefficiencies that circularity could address. How can the value gap lens bridge this gap?
Yeah, I think that there are two things. What struck me is that you actually include externalities for carbon emissions, for waste that literally, creates. And I think that is an important thing to make that visible. That is not part of the normal GDP. And at the same time, you have a problem with that because it's an externality. Actors in the economy don't feel that loss. So I think it's about 10, 15 trillion that you calculated. We have that kind of losses. Well, then we have all the things that are inefficiencies in the economy. Yeah, and I think the only thing that you really have to do, make them visible. And if I looked at the report, if there is a bit of critique, often to capture back these kind of like inefficiencies, you need to make a certain investment. And I think that is where the balance at this moment has to be found. Many companies probably don't see what they can win, and they can calculate quite well what they have to invest. And maybe the decision making is also done at different places. So the people that have to invest don't reap the benefits. And then you get the things that we now have, excluding the externalities, you have a 15% inefficiency in the economy. And I think, that is probably even natural to have that. And we really have to work to make it clear that okay, the gains of there need an investment here. And if we can really bridge that gap, then I think you will go into the right direction. I think, but keep on making it visible and how big it is. That is the most important thing.
That's definitely the ambition, Arnold. Good to hear. Maybe a very quick follow-up question. Do you see any chance that GDP could one day be overshadowed by such an economic metric that better captures also the value loss?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I mean, if you go back to GDP, I have a colleague at Leiden University, Rutger Hoekstra, who wrote a whole book on that. And he found something very interesting. He said, if you look how GDP was developed, it didn't exist in the 1930s. But we had the Bretton Woods conference and all the people came together there. And in the wake of the Second World War, they agreed on this system. And all the statistical offices in all the world, they define GDP in one way. And if you have beyond GDP indicators, well, you come with the value gap. There are other people with, other type of welfare indicators. So it is a very scattered landscape. And that is actually at this moment a weakness. So what has to be done is that we institutionalize a new metric in the same way as GDP is institutionalized. And actually that is an institutional transition. And so we have to look at it like that. And that is a process. And I'm pretty sure at some point it will happen. But if it will be your indicator or a slightly different one, I don't know. But if you have to go in that direction, that is, I think, obvious for many people.
Yeah, fully agree with you. And also maybe just from our end, we would rather ensure that there is such a beyond GDP indicator than being very stubborn about saying it has to be our way of measuring things. I fully agree with you, Arnold. There are other organizations, initiatives that might have very relevant complementary indicators or ways to measure it. And I think it's really important to also align and work together in that regard. I would like to move on to Diewertje. So Diewertje, you engage with businesses from a wide range of industries through your work at Deloitte. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for businesses to capture this value that is currently being lost?
Yeah, well, for me, if you look at the numbers of the report, of course, the potential value loss at the end of life really jumps out with 10 trillion euro a year. And I think this is also where a lot of opportunities lie for businesses which have not been part of the focus. I think production loss, energy loss, and food loss. I think a lot of companies see this and they directly see it in their numbers already, but end of life, it's usually out of their sight, out of their business. So this is where I think for the value chain lies a lot of opportunities. And it's either to preserve the product value or the material value. So if we look at the product value first, if you can expand the product duration, so the lifetime, and with this retain and increase that product value, there are several business models you can actually apply to do this. So as a service models is, I think, one of the most common ones, where you shift from linear sales to continuous revenue and services. This also increases the incentives for organization to actually make the products more durable and repairable by reducing the total cost of ownership, but increasing the total value. Of course, this works best for high value products. Yeah. If you have more lower value products, looking at maintaining and preserving the material value becomes more important. So can you set up take back schemes to get it back, and then recycling or potentially parts harvesting to make sure that you get those materials back in the loop. There are a lot of requirements to organizing the latter part well. And for me, two things stand out there. So one is it also to make it easy and rewarding for the customer to participate in these take-back schemes. And secondly, ensure that there is that feedback loop from the return product, so you can feed it back to design to keep increasing the value preservation. So design for recycling, modular design, etc. So you increase the parts of the materials that are recovered.
Yeah, and just very quickly, what is holding businesses back? Because I mean, if it is all about economic value, then this almost sounds like a no-brainer. I think. Also, what you shared sounds like a very clear pathway. So in your opinion, what are the main things that are holding businesses back?
I think this relates especially to what Arnold just mentioned. The person who makes the investments or need to make the investment are not per se the ones who are reaping the benefits immediately. And you really need to work together across the value chain. I think that is a first one. And secondly, it is, of course, a shift from business as usual. We have optimized the linear economy. Customers, organizations, they have been doing things in a linear way for a long time. They have invested in these processes, and incorporating circular practices might require new capabilities, both on the producer side, on the customer side, and really working together across the value chain. So on paper, it sounds potentially easy. In practice, there's a whole bunch of people you need to just collaborate with and organize it with. And then the question again, who is getting the benefits from these investments?
Yes. And who's providing the financial flows, maybe. So I would like to make a bridge to you, Arno, because shifting financial flows towards models that retain value rather than destroy it is a key challenge. In the transition, I think also as the previous speakers have just emphasized too. How can we redirect capital from value destructive to value retentive activities?
Yes, thank you. Well, to move the needle, the World Bank has developed we call it the 4I framework. 4 I's meaning institutions, incentives, information, and investment. So the first I, institutions, it really talks about political leadership, ideally on the highest level of government. A whole of economy approach, not just from environment ministries, but really involving economic and finance ministries, the heavyweights, if you want, given the role of fiscal instruments, industrial policy, investment planning, and so on. So this is essential to keep all these ministries involved. And also policy coherence is very important, especially from a World Bank, Development Bank perspective. International cooperation and trade policies are essential to keep in mind, also to avoid a leakage to linear production havens, but also to support partner countries in the transition. The second I is incentives. Obviously, today's markets still favor linear models, mainly because primary models, primary raw materials are still very cheap and externalities are underpriced. So we need economic and fiscal incentives to promote circular markets, including taxes on primary resources, on pollution, shifting the tax burden from labor to materials and phasing out environmentally harmful subsidies. Information is the third I, and you're working a lot on closing the data gap. Better data is so essential because it lowers risk, it enables innovation, and supports both policymaking and investment decisions. And this requires not just monitoring and metrics, but really also product information tools like material passports, labeling, so that consumers know which products to choose, repairers know how to fix them, recyclers know how to safely recover materials, and businesses can track materials across the whole supply chain. And finally, investments. The IFC branch of the World Bank has recently launched a circular economy investment tracker. And that shows that the private sector invested around $200 billion between 2018 and 2024 in just 3 sectors on circular economy. So that's electronics and appliances, packages, and textiles. But of course, more capital is needed, but this capital will not flow without reforming those policies that actually continue to bias towards the linear model.
Yeah.
So it's the 4 I's that are really important in the policy framework, and the mixture of these policies will help to turn the needle.
Maybe just to mention in relation to the last I on investments, we've also done a special edition of the Circularity Gap Report on finance that we launched last year, where I think we came to very similar conclusions. Arno, I would like to stay with you, if I may, because what we have seen also here at Circular Economy is that the circular economy has risen in prominence with the agenda on the agenda of multilateral organizations, such as also the World Bank. What is the role of multi-development banks in driving circularity and helping close the value gap?
Yes, well, MDBs can obviously play a critical role in supporting governments implement this kind of type of policy framework, mainly through 2 types of tools. So one is the advisory support, focusing on advocacy, on promoting the importance of circularity, on raising awareness, and on highlighting the available support and opportunities of the circular economy, but also in capacity building, on all levels of government, but also for businesses, and of course in policy development, sort of promoting policies and regulations that support circularity. But apart from the advisory support, there's also obviously the financial support. And financing support can go to all through the value chain, from circular design and production to circular use to circular value recovery, and so on. And there's a host of tools that multilateral development banks can use, including sovereign loans, grants, development policy financing is very important, green bonds, more innovative instruments, blended finance, and so on. But again, it's the mix of tools that is important. Basically, to summarize, I mean, MDPs don't just fund projects, but they really shape policy frameworks. They build institutional capacity, and they also mobilize private capital. And again, the policy mix is what matters.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Arno. I would like to move to you, Diewertje. Earlier, you also mentioned the importance, of course, for businesses, for private sector, to be able to capture this value now being lost, and you referred to the strategies like how to preserve product value and material value. But what I find interesting is you work a lot with these businesses directly. So let's say you know them inside out. So coming back to the practical realities of the private sector, what internal changes are needed for businesses to be able to capture value that is now being lost?
Yeah, and I'd like to also come back to Arno, what you were saying. You mentioned the transparency, product passports, what's in the materials, and I think that is one of the challenges. Might not just be internal, but the supply chains that we created are very complex with so many suppliers that without understanding what exactly is in your product, I need to potentially go back to, I don't know, tier 10 or whatever supplier. That's difficult. I think that is one aspect which can prevent internal changes because companies don't know actually where some parts of the products are coming from. But also, of course, with any large change, there are multiple things that need to go hand in hand. So you need to have a different business strategy, business model. The culture needs to be there, especially if you're doing something new. It requires a more of a learning organization than a very efficient organization, which is focused on doing things how they've been doing that for a long time. But for me, the most important thing is, okay, just get started. There are always good ideas at organization. Think about the current product that you have. How can you change the business model? How can you change the service to your clients? But keep in mind the willingness of customers to join, and where can you make changes in your product. We work with companies to we call model, pilot, and scale circular solutions, where you start with modeling your solution with a minimal viable, or some colleagues say a minimal lovable product. I actually quite like that as well. You pilot this with customers and then make sure that you have this feedback loop to improve. For instance, there was a company and they sell refurbished equipment, so they get their own equipment back. They invested quite a lot in the take-back scheme, but the sales crew, they actually don't really sell those refurbished products because they are incentivized by making as much revenue as possible because that's tied to their bonus. And then they say, well, the refurbished ones have less revenue, but they are as good. So think about, okay, what are you measuring? So the KPIs, and what are the process you have, so the incentivizations of your sales people, to make sure that they also want to sell this to customers, because a lot of customers are actually willing to, but they just need to be told. So that transparency is very important. I think another thing which is important, while you are piloting, already think about the roadmap to scale. What is the capabilities that are needed, both in the short and in the long term? And don't forget the economic side. Do you need to make very large investments? Okay, can you spread that out over time? I think most of the companies out there are not willing to invest a lot already, while they don't know if there's if the business case is going to work out. And we hope with this report it will also show, and also the resilience in the supply chain, that it can help to bridge that business the business gap, the business case gap. Yeah. So multiple elements, but I would always urge, just get started. There are always employees in your organization who have great ideas. Make sure you can harvest that.
Yeah, I think that's a great and actionable recommendation, Diewertje. Arnold, I have a final question for you. Because a value gap metric is a new approach, and it's also the first attempt to quantify the economic losses in the linear economy. Where does this methodology still need refinement, according to you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think I alluded already a little bit. I mean, usually you need to invest something to make something circular. And in many places in your report, you are kind of like, yeah, we didn't take that into account. So that is at least one thing. Yeah, I think Diewert, you made very clear that there are sometimes reasons why companies don't invest because in the end, transaction costs go up, other things go up, and we all know that if you look at business models. And yeah, that is I would say, the main refinement that I would suggest basically. And yeah, and I think for the rest, I mean, the first iteration, we had quite a discussion on certain things, but I think now you really see, like, okay, waste, that is that. If you don't have to waste, you don't have to manage that. Of course, you save the cost. That is all great. And of course, if you have, let's say, waste that is not well treated, I mean, then of course you have externalities, and there are all kind of estimates for that. So I think that part is already quite good. It is more literally the transition cost. What does it take to make the transition? And you have tangible and intangible hindrances. Because I think we underestimate maybe why the system works as it works at the moment. That people are not stupid. They keep in their habits because it works for them. And doing something new is often a bit difficult. And we have to understand that much better than just saying like, look, there's a lot of money to be made. Well, try to understand exactly where it is, what effort you have to do, and then make that effort as easy as possible. I think that is the step that we have to make at the moment. And then things that I heard, like, the usual things. I mean, lower taxes on income and make taxes on resources higher. And a lot of these other things, they are so useful. But yeah.
Yeah. We agree.
Can I add one
Yes.
one remark to where I think that of course, what we didn't take into account in the report, and those are the rebound effects, which can be huge. And I think we all know the Jevons paradox, and or the more economic or the cheaper products get or less energy they use, the more that we actually are purchasing or bringing more equipment into our home. So this is a difficult one. We didn't include that. I think whoever is able to predict the rebound effects is going to be have a very, very great in terms of modeling that. But that is, for me, always a great unknown.
Can I take 1 minute to give an example of one of my PhDs, Levon Amatumi, if he's listening, then he really deserves credit. He had, in one of the Nature Family journals, he looked at, let's say, second-hand phones. And of course, we try to think, we refurbish this thing, and then, okay, I replace a new one. He found out that is not going to happen. Because if I have the opportunity to sell my phone quicker and easier, I probably use it shorter myself. The new user will not use it for the usual 3 or 4 years, but maybe 2 years. And of course, you have a new market because all of a sudden these mobile phones become, let's say, affordable for people who did not. So you already have 2 rebounds, a bigger market. That is the Jevons paradox. And the other thing is that lifetime extension wasn't as good as you would expect. Yeah, and I think with taxation you can do a lot about these things, but and at the same time I would say let's not make it too complicated. Let's just bang the drum with this message. Let's focus on the hindrances of making the transition, and let's get that in order. And then I think rebound effects in the end you can control if you do that with good governance. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to the panelists. I will hand it over to Avo, who might have found some interesting questions in the Q&A that he himself or the panelists might want to answer. So over to you, Avo.
Thank you very much, Hilde, and thank you very much for everyone that has joined us and that has dropped their questions in the Q&A function. I also see the chat is quite busy with a lot of messages, even some discussions going on. I think we welcome all of those interactions. I think there's a couple of questions from the Q&A function that stood out. I think I will just put them forward to the panel, and maybe whoever feels better or feels more comfortable answering them can take them.
Yes, and I would like to ask the panel to keep the answers short so we can address as many questions as possible. Consider it a challenge. Okay.
Great. So the first one is, the value gap is dramatically high, which probably causes skepticism in economic leaders. How can we convince them that the gap is truly so extreme? I guess this points at kind of the magnitude of the challenge and how can we avoid kind of decision makers becoming a bit paralyzed by the scale of it.
I would focus that the opportunity is huge. Yes, we did a lot of modelation, a lot of assumptions. I think we were, in some parts, very conservative. I just want to focus the opportunity is huge. And even if we are 5 trillion off, the opportunity still is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. My answer would be, if I may, half of that is externalities. We know that they are huge from climate and other things you had. And then you have another 15% of your GDP where you're not efficient. I think any organization has 15% inefficiencies. I mean, that's another way to make it plausible.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
From my point of view, I don't think it's about the exact number. I mean, nobody can give the exact number, but it's about bringing this to the table and starting the debate about circular economy being an economic issue and not, with environmental benefits if you want, but it's not merely an environmental issue, but it's really about saving money.
Yeah. Great.
I completely agree, and I think this also echoes the conversation we're having about the methodology and so on, and how this is the first time, and I'm sure that it will evolve, and we will refine it over time. But I think it's more about the message that the figures bring rather than the exactitude of the figures. Thank you, everyone, for your answers. Maybe there's also one point around circular economy business models, which has been also a bit of a topic that we've been discussing. So this person says, I would like to understand the expert's opinion on how the financial as well as operational risk management perspective could boost the implementation of circular economy business models. I think we kind of touched a bit about this, some of the challenges from a financial management point of view, from an operational management point of view. I don't know if any of you maybe want to pick this one up.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
But I think Duwitje for sure has something to say on that as well. Now, I wrote a paper on that already 20 years, and that's my best cited paper. It doesn't always say a lot, but I think what people misunderstand is that if I sell you a mobile phone, I throw it over the fence and I get me 500 euros or something like that. If I play someone like, oh, you can rent it from me, you depend on Arnold Tucker that I behave quite well with this thing. Yeah. So if I misbehave, then the owner, that is then the supplier, has value loss. And they can try to sue me, but we all know how expensive lawyers are. Yeah. So you see already that the risk profile that you have for selling products is totally different as the risk profile as keeping things in a circular ownership. You get more transaction costs. That's the lawyers. You don't get your money directly. You don't get your 500 euros directly. You have to wait until I have paid my 25 euros a month or something like that. So that are just a few examples that you see why actually managing a product service business model or a circular business model for a company is much more complicated than a linear business model. And there are situations where it works perfectly because the value is so much in the product you want to keep it back. And then people are going to think about how can I minimize these kind of risks that you talk about. But there are also situations where they say, well, forget about it. I don't do it. It is too complex.
I think you really need to think of the product that you have and the increased convenience that you bring to customers. If you just do this from a financing perspective, probably is not going to work. But building the relationship with your customers and then increasing the loyalty, I think also is one of the benefits for organizations, and understanding how can I keep my products in use longer. So that is the incentivization. But again, it's working across the value chain. Financing, of course, as a service model is indeed different. But it can help you in your operational risk as well, especially in value chains who are more volatile in terms of pricing, or you're leaning on specific materials which are difficult to get. Although I also thought that with COVID and everything that happened, people would be looking more for value chain resilience. Perhaps nowadays, again, it's more of a topic, but it kind of goes in waves. And I would love to see that wave becoming more of an upward trend.
Maybe from a banking sector point of view, and I'll be very brief, mindful of the time. There are many aspects, but I just focus on one, and that's the capacity of commercial banks to actually finance circular business models. And in many countries, they do not have the capacity. So it's really about kind of building that capacity and informing banks to build the relationship with the companies and to understand the circular business models and the advantages, and then to find the right instruments to finance them.
Mm-hmm. You have a very, very short question with a short answer still, or
Let me see.
are they all too complex to give a short answer to?
I think maybe there is one interesting question. I don't know, maybe Arnold from you. I think this you might be better placed, but really like very, very short answer. It is around, is there any reason why water loss is not explicitly mentioned or considered?
Oh, I don't know. You look like the chair of a PhD committee, also short question, and that kind. I don't know. I think I didn't write a report. I mean, I'm pretty sure that you can include the externalities of water scarcity. I mean, there are water scarcity methods that we actually use in the input-output work that I do with a lot of friends. We include that, and I'm pretty sure we can put a price on it, but I have to ask almost you why you didn't do that. I think you did already a great job by having climate, by having the waste. You can expand it to other things, but yeah.
Next version of the report, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's it. You start somewhere now, like with the circularity gap. I also had a lot of critics on the circularity gap itself, but it helps, and you start to understand where it points at and where you have to be careful using it.
Yeah, I think it's always the balance that we try to, you want to make something that is easy to understand while doing the reality justice. I would like to thank the panelists for joining us today. I think it was really insightful, and I think we could have continued for a long time, but we need to keep an eye on time. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we very much appreciate you as our critical collaborators and friends on this journey. So as we come to the end of today's session, I want to bring us back to one central idea. The circular economy is often discussed in terms of environmental benefits or resource security, and these are certainly important. But what this year's report shows is something equally important. It is also a major economic opportunity. A system where we are currently losing trillions in value is not an efficient system. It is also not sustainable. And closing that gap is not just about reducing harm. It is about unlocking value that is already embedded in our economy today. Looking ahead, we will continue building on this work. In fact, we will soon begin the process of recalculating the global circularity metric for next year's edition of the report. But we cannot do it alone. Circle Economy is an independent, non-profit organization, and our work depends on collaboration and support from partners who share our ambition. So if you value this work and you would like to contribute to our work or to support our work going forward, please do reach out. We would be very glad to hear from you. Finally, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to the panelists, to Alvo, to all the colleagues that have been helping us with this webinar. We hope you, the audience, found this session valuable and insightful. And we, of course, encourage you to take these insights forward. Share the report, circulate it with your networks, and help us continue the conversation on what a truly circular economy can deliver. Thank you again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.